I'm tempted to begin with German. Frisch und frei, stark und treu, ein Hoch der Turnerei. Round of applause. First of all, welcome to the Kade Center for German American Studies. We're very pleased that we have many guests from near and far today to participate in commemorating the arrival, and I realize that you came by overland route. That I'm very impressed. The arrival of the Turner archives from the New York Turnverein, and we're pleased that three gentlemen are with us today, Hans Sommer, Frank Wedel, and Herr Beinert.
Yeah, Fred Beinert.
Fred Beinert, yeah, who will be talking to us later on in the program. Some of you may wonder, well, what is the Kade Center? Are you wondering that? It was started in 1968 as a center to focus on the archives of the German element, the immigrants from German-speaking countries in Europe and their descendants here in the middle western part of the United States, and for that matter in the entire United States. And you can read this nice plaque if you desire to later on. Our initial acquisition was interesting, however. We found out from the Historical Society in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that they didn't want the library of the Turnverein. So Tony Bertzel, in his wisdom, acquired the entire library of the Milwaukee Turnverein. And those older 19th century materials are in that center room there. Later on, a student in American Studies, a master's student, Katja Rampelmann, came to my office. She said, well, where can I find out something about the Germans in Lawrence? I'm writing a master's thesis about the Germans in Lawrence. I said, go see Rod Ernst. Rod, raise your hand. Rod is the grandson of Philip Ernst, Sr., son of Philip Ernst, Jr. And Philip Ernst, Sr. was perhaps the last Turner member in Lawrence. Is that approximately correct?
Well, he was one of the last.
One of the last.
He bought the building when it went to some.
He got the building. He got the Turner Hall in 1911. I said, maybe Rod Ernst knows something. And Katja found in Rod's garage the library of the Lawrence Turnverein. So we have Turner materials here. And now we're very, very pleased that our friends in New York have decided to locate their archives here at the Kade Center. And we'll hear more about that in just a second. The next question you may have is, well, who are the Turners? How many of you are familiar with Turnerism? Ah, I see lots of hands going up. Okay. Well, Frank, you're in luck. Three-quarters of my talk is now being discarded. But for those of you who don't know it, the organization began in the midst of the Napoleonic era in an attempt to train German youth to liberate the German nation from French oppression and to instill the ideas of reform in the government, liberty, etc. in the populace. As you well know, Napoleon was defeated, and of course the Turners took over Germany. Unfortunately, a fraternity member killed someone in an assassination in 1819, and the Turners were associated with the assassination and were then banned from German society. Well, they went underground. Did you guys know that? You went underground? You don't have to answer. Okay, you'll talk about that later on.
I can't remember that.
And in the 1840s, 1842, that ban was lifted, and Turnerism again became a public force in Germany. And then, as we all know, 1848, 1849, the year of political upheaval in the German nations, all 35 of them actually, and they attempted to write a Bill of Rights, write a constitution, get a constitutional monarchy established. The Turners were in the thick of that struggle. And of course Germany established a constitutional monarchy in 1849, isn't that right? No. Again, failure. The King of Prussia rejected the crown, and the defeat of that revolution forced many of the revolutionaries into exile. And where did they end up? In Kansas, of course. Well, actually, they ended up mostly in New York, and then in the intervening states, places like St. Louis. How many are familiar with the history of Turnerism in St. Louis? I'm going to have to talk for about an hour or two. I'll get through this quickly. But it's connected to New York. And I'll just mention the name, Franz Siegel. You guys remember Franz Siegel? Well, you don't remember him, but you've heard of him. Franz Siegel had the privilege of serving in the army in Baden, and when revolution broke out, he became the war minister of the dictatorship of the revolutionary government in 1849. It was short-lived. They were defeated by the Prussians. Siegel fled, ended up in New York, was a fencing teacher in the Turner Society there, and then later moved to St. Louis. And as Hans and I were just discussing, Siegel was a far-sighted person. He suggested preparing for war against the slave states early on in the 1850s. And what happened in St. Louis in February of 1861, prior to Lincoln's inauguration, prior to the bombardment of Fort Sumter? The Turners organized companies of fighters in the Turnhalle in St. Louis. And when Lincoln issued his call for 5 regiments from Missouri, which the governor refused to provide, who provided the 5 regiments? The Turners! and who commanded the 3rd Missouri Volunteers, 3-month volunteers? Franz Siegel. And what emblem did the 3rd Missouri Regiment wear? The cockade of the 1848 revolutionaries in Baden. And who were the members of those regiments? Who was a member of that regiment? Yes, every one of those guys were Turners. Well, not everyone. They took a few other Germans too. But people like Friedrich Hecker, the leader of the uprising in Baden in 1848, enlisted as a private in the 3rd Regiment. He later became a colonel. Promotions went quickly in those days. There were a couple other guys you may recall. Gustav Struve. I don't want to get through the whole, Frank will never let me go through the whole roster. I was just going to mention 2, Corporal Eberhard Enheiser and a Private Adolphus Busch. Anybody ever heard of these guys?
Adolphus Busch. Every night.
How about Enheiser? I think they were Belgians. Well, these 5 regiments, for better or for worse, under 4 German officers, and Francis Blair commanded the 1st Regiment. He was the brother of the Secretary of the Postmaster General of Lincoln, Montgomery Blair. They were considered instrumental in saving Missouri for the Union cause. So let's give a big round of applause to the Turners for saving Missouri. And as just a little personal note, you say, well, why are you wearing this cockade? Because my great-great-grandfather, in his obituary in 1914, it said he fought under Siegel in 2 wars. The first in 48-49 against the Prussians, and the second in 1861 against the southern states. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration as to where he was actually located, but he did serve under Siegel in Baden, and his brother definitely served under Siegel at Wilson's Creek and was left on the battlefield for dead, but that's another story. All right, fast forward to Kansas City after the Civil War. What happens in the 1880s in the public school system of Kansas City?
Physical education?
Exactly. Physical education is introduced as a permanent part of the school curriculum in the school district of Kansas City, Missouri. And this is one of the first in the country. And who did this? Carl Betz. And what was Carl Betz? He was the Turnmeister at the Kansas City Turnverein. He had been trained in Milwaukee. He had taught Turnerism in South Bend, Indiana, Terre Haute, Minneapolis, St. Paul. But the last years of his life were here in Kansas City, and he is responsible for physical education in our public school system. So let's give a round of applause to Kade.